Here we go. Okay, so to pick up where we left off yesterday, we are now ready to secure our APIs. You know, we can look at our applications that are running in Cloud Hub, but we know that these endpoints are unsecured endpoints. So we really need to take care of that. That is not best practices. We don't want to leave them like that. We want to get those secured. Okay, so we are going to, I don't know which one I said we were going to do basic. I don't know which one we were going to do embedded and which one we were going to do proxy. Let me see. I guess we could go ahead and do the American. Apologize for that. 1 second. There we go. Yeah, I guess what we'll do is go ahead and do the American flight one as a proxy, and then the patient will do a basic endpoint using the auto discovery. All right. So that means that, and I may have had that set up to do it the opposite way before this, but we're actually doing it now. So I guess we'll go that route. And just to keep me on track, I'm going to go ahead and add that we're going to do the proxy here with the American Airlines. And we'll do the basic endpoint here for the patients, the patient records API. Okay, that'll keep me in, and hopefully that'll keep me on track. I have had my head in many different spaces since yesterday. I've been doing, and Sandra, how did you like the Agent Force thing we did last night?
Yeah, it was really good.
Pretty interesting, huh? So I've been doing those and preparing them. So my head's kind of been on the Salesforce side more than this over here. So anyway, my apologies. I'll get my head back in the game here. So again, we are going to do the American Airlines with the proxy first. We'll knock that out. And then we're going to do the basic endpoint for the patients. And I know we have our application already running. Essentially, it doesn't need to be running first. So what we're going to do, let's come out here and on the patient records application here, the system API itself, the actual application. Let's go ahead and stop it. Don't delete it, but just stop it because it doesn't necessarily need to be running before we do the managing of the API, because we actually want to include a property here that has that API ID. All right, so we're going to have two different processes happening on this. And so I think I'll go ahead and do, I'll be adding the instructions on here that you will see are step-by-step. We're going to walk through them. So instead, the one we're going to be working with first is the American Airline one. And that one, to do a proxy, does need to have a URL and an application that is available. So we do want to go ahead and click on this and copy this public endpoint. We're going to need this public endpoint here. Whoops, not that. We're going to need this public endpoint. So let's go ahead and copy that and put it in your notepads. Okay, Raj, understand? Not a problem. I will share out the recordings also so that you have that later. And then I'm going to combine them all and put them in different segments where they're meaningful and label them like standalone server, Mule domain. I'll go back through and kind of pull them together like that. So let's get our URL here. We're going to need that. Okay, so that's the first step. Come to the American System API. This is our application that's running in Cloud Hub 2. And now we're going to go to managing this API. The API itself is currently not managed. So to do that, we want to go to API Manager. API Manager. And we want to make sure you're in Dev. And we're going to add an API. So then just click on Add API, and we're going to add a new API to manage. We're not creating a new API. We are going to add a new one to manage. Okay, Sandra, understand. Okay, so once we're in here, there's a lot right here. I want to take a minute to talk about some objectives, okay, as far as the exam's concerned. So once we're here, we're ready to add an API. We have the Flex Gateway, or we have the Mule Gateway. Now, the Flex Gateway is a great feature where you can spin up your own gateway and manage and extend any point platform by managing APIs wherever they reside. Okay. They do not have to be a Mule app. In fact, they can be on different platforms, whatever the case may be, but you can add your proxy to the Flex Gateway that you manage. So this is a customer hosted product in a container, and then you install the Flex Gateway, and then you add the proxy, or I should say it actually spins it up as a proxy. Eventually I'll have one of these visible that you could see, but there isn't one. But if you needed to add the gateway, go ahead and click on this, add a gateway. And these are the instructions to add a gateway depending upon the operating system that you're going to be using or the environment you want to use. Okay, so if it's Linux or containerized or Kubernetes or OpenShift, whatever your choice is, you will have the instructions of how to install that Flex Gateway. Okay, once you do, then that gateway is going to be an option for you to use in API Manager as where you want to add that management, where you want the proxy to reside, where you're going to be using that. Okay, but in our case, the other option is the Mule Gateway. Okay, now this resides in the Mule runtime, or I should say it's embedded in the Mule runtime. Okay, it is a Mule Gateway. So be familiar with the options. And in the Mule Gateway is where you have the option of either doing the basic endpoint or a proxy app. Okay, so for our case, we're going to deploy a proxy application. Okay, and as we come down, we can go ahead and automatically by default chooses Cloud Hub 2.0. That is fine. And because I have on this account the ability to choose my region. Okay, and I will go with the US East. That's fine. Okay, and as we come down, we can choose if we want to use the edge. Remember those options of when if the runtime version is going to be patched periodically or long-term or none. We'll leave that at the edge version. And I think I'm going to just leave it on Java 8 for right now. But now we want to give a name for our proxy. Okay, so we're actually having, to put in a separate name. So let's do training for -American -proxy. Okay, so this is going to be the proxy. And now do some kind of an identifier. And you would use whatever you have for the facility that you're working with. But I'm going to just put a date stamp on it so that I can keep up of when this one was created. So put a proxy name. And then we'll go to next. And now we need to select the API. Okay, so we can see the two that are here. And we will choose on American Flights API. And if I start moving too quick, y'all let me know. Okay. All right. And this is defaulting. It's picking up the details of our specification, the latest version here. We're not using governance. This is part of governance, by the way. We're not using governance on this. We should be, but we're not. But anyway, that lets you know the status for the conformance of it. And we'll click on next. Okay, so everything here for now is fine. We're not necessarily going to change anything at this point. I do want to incorporate HTTPS, and I will have to create a key value, a key pair for that, public private. So I will get that in place. I do want to cover that because in order to use these assets elsewhere, there's some stipulations on it being HTTPS because I do want to populate these and ultimately use these, and you can too, use these in Salesforce agents, but they need to be HTTPS. So we will be adding TLS context probably first of next week.
Quick question.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes. The downstream and upstream, it always throws me off. I don't know if you went over that. Could you tell me the difference?
About to get there. I know it is.
Okay.
I don't know who wrote who wrote the terminology on the platform, but I guess it does make sense. But yeah, we're about to hit that next screen here, Damien.
You always need a graphic to remember these things.
Yes, yes. So we name the proxy, and again, a couple other things here are the client provider right now is Anypoint. It's defaulting to Anypoint. If we had, for example, Okta, 2.0, that would, and we chose this environment to use that, we would see that it's managed by that client provider. So there's a couple of other things there. You can click open the advanced option here. And this is where you're going to see the consumer endpoint. We're not going to fill that out yet. I want to show you something very important regarding that. And everything else is...
Light Kevin's your favorite. Not
Which
dark
one?
Kevin.
Say that again. Damien, were you talking to us? Maybe not. Okay. So going to show you a few things here. We're going to go to next. Now, this is where it's going to ask for the upstream URL. This is your app. Okay. This is your app that's running out there that's unsecured. Okay, Damien, no problem. I didn't think so. I thought you were talking about something on that configuration. So go and copy the URL of your application that's out there running, and we'll paste it in here. So that would be the upstream URL. Again, remember this visual. This is considered to be the upstream URL. In fact, let me throw that in there. Oh, stop it. Okay. Okay. So now we can see the also known as the upstream URL here. Okay. Whether it's a Mule app or not, it still would be considered the upstream URL. So that comes in here. Okay. And now we're ready to go to next. But one thing we do want to add in this upstream URL, every time we hit this endpoint right now, we have to, let me go ahead and bring up Advanced REST Client here. We have to add API at the end. and then the endpoint, right? The API / flights. Because it's using the API kit router. So for every request coming in, we've got to add that API right there. So in order to make it a little easier for the proxy not to have that prefix, we can add that API here. Okay. And I don't think we have the / at the end. So add your URL and then / API. Okay. So that way we don't have, for when we want to access the proxy, we don't have to add that API every time. And we'll click on next. Okay, quick review. We'll go over what we added. We chose the Mule Gateway. It's a proxy type, meaning it's a proxy application. It's going to be a separate application running. And where we deployed it to, here's what we named it. Okay, there's the name of it. We chose the American Flights API. It's HTTP right now. And here is our upstream URL. And we added the API prefix so that we don't have to resend that in under the proxy name. Save and deploy. Okay. Once this is, so it is actually deploying as a regular app. If we're going to see a message shortly, we could jump over to Runtime Manager and look at our applications. And at some point, we're going to see that proxy here. There it is. Okay, there's our proxy right there. So this is a proxy application that's going to sit in front of our downstream URL. Okay. And we will be adding the enforcement into for authentication or for whatever policy we want to add. We're going to add various policies to this API. Namely, we're going to add client ID and client secret. Okay. So it's running. We can go ahead and click on it. Well, it'll have logs. Okay. It'll have logs. We'll be able to see the logs as it is spinning up. We can look at the settings. We should be able to see the statuses. So it's like a regular app, right? It's a regular app. And as it's doing this, we can also see that it has a public endpoint. Now it's the proxy. I want you to copy that. Okay. Copy that. Hang on to that. Put that in our notes. So in our notes, one of them is going to be our application itself, the web service, and the other one is going to be our proxy. And we put it in the name of our proxy. I do that for educational purposes. I've seen a lot of people go with it being called just an API, whatever you want to call it, whatever your naming convention has. For educational, I always label it proxy. That way it kind of resonates what it is. All right, so it's replica started. Let's refresh the screen here. It should be in a running status. There we go, running status. Okay. So let's go back to API Manager now. And in API Manager, now that that has completed, we have a dashboard under our API summary that tells us the API instance ID. Okay, we're not really using that for auto discovery in this environment. Okay, but it does have this ID is important when we are interacting with it, even in command line interface. Okay, and here is our implementation. This is our web service. This is our system API web service, the other app. And notice that there's not a consumer endpoint here right now. But we do know that there is a endpoint. We saw the public endpoint, right? We saw the public endpoint where the proxy was deployed. So if I open up a new tab and I put in that new endpoint, and now I just type in flights, this is the proxy endpoint. Proxy endpoint here. And I send that in, and we get back the flights. It is still an unsecured endpoint. I didn't have to add a client ID or client secret or anything. It's still unsecured, but it does have a proxy in front of it. So if we look at the actions in the upper right, let's view the configuration details. And we get a nice design here that tells us that if a client's sending in a request, it goes through the API gateway, and then it will come down to hit our application. Okay, but it's got to go through the gateway through our proxy app first. Okay, very much like I've shown you on the Lucid chart. We've got that separate step there.
So,
now, if we
hey, Diane, go back
yeah.
to that diagram. I just want to point something out why I think it's confusing. So I think they're thinking of like upstream being in the cloud. The client is like your laptop or something that's down. But then this graphic is reverse to that. Like
Yeah.
upstream is down and downstream is up.
True. I can see how that would be.
If they had done it sideways or something, or I don't know.
It might have been a little easier to follow, huh? Yeah.
So you just have to learn that the way they're doing it, the cloud is down in the diagram, but should be upside down.
Well, you know what? When we do our diagrams, we need to do them differently. Because you're right. This is actually hitting what's up there in the cloud already, right? Yeah. Yeah, great point. Very good. So if we go to Exchange, I want you to go to Exchange now. Let's open out a sidebar, and let's open Exchange. And if I come to Exchange here and I want to look at the American Flights API, I know I've got another instance that's in use. Okay. I not only have my mocking service, but I also should have another API instance. Okay. API instance. So when I click on this, and I have the mocking service and I have the API instance in dev that we just managed, but there's not a URL here. And with there not being a URL here, if I want to test out these endpoints and do a GET request, I only have the mocking service available as a server to test it against. I only have the mocking service, but that's not what I want.
Because that's not real data.
Right. That is just the faux data that we gave it, the example data. I want the live data. How am I going to get that live data? Who knows the mechanism? Anyone right off that knows the mechanism that would actually allow us to test in Exchange against that live data? I'll give you a hint. Something is missing here. The URL. So let's go back to API Manager. And in API Manager, we need to add the consumer endpoint. Okay, so let's edit this. Let's come up here and edit this. And in our configuration, there was a consumer endpoint that's optional. Now, this is where we want to put in our proxy endpoint. That's the public-facing URL that we want to use going forward. We do not want them to use our web service URL, because this is where the enforcement is going to be here in this proxy. Okay. So our enforcement is going to be right there in the policies folder when we add it. So we need to provide the public endpoint or the consumer endpoint as the public endpoint for the proxy. So now that we've added this, we're going to save it and apply those changes. And yes, it will redeploy. So now we're routing all traffic through the proxy. And once this, I think it even does it before it actually totally redeploys it. Let's go to Exchange. And let's refresh this screen here. And now we have an endpoint here. See the URL? We just added that. And now if we go to hit the flights get, now you have a choice of servers. And you can come down to the dev environment or dev instance and send in the request. And now notice your data is not your example data any longer. Look at the departure date. It's a date time here. Okay, it's just a date here. That's our example data on the left. That's the data from the database on the right. So if you do not see anything listed, or if you didn't want anyone to be testing out a different environment that you may not want it exposed yet, you could not have added the consumer endpoint here, and therefore it would not show in the list here. Okay. And this dev v1 with the API instance ID here is coming through by default. I personally do leave it that way. Where you can modify this, and we do it in the fundamental course, is in the configuration. As you're coming down here in the details of the configuration where we just added the consumer endpoint, you could add an instance label. And, maybe you need to, wanted to identify it a certain way, you could. Okay. If you don't put anything here, it's going to default to your API ID. Okay. So it's defaulting. Where did that just go? It's defaulting to this API instance ID. And I like that. I like seeing that there, but it's a preference thing. It's up to, how you want to manage that. Then we get some metrics of how the app is happening here as well, what's going on with requests. And, you'll get a little bit of a visual. There used to be also quite a bit more for analytics, and analytics has moved. They're changing that up a little bit. So there's some things going on there. But at any rate, this is where we now, when we send in that request, it's still going through the proxy. Okay. And we're able to get the same results from a client app, but in exchange, what became so different is having the ability to choose here. Again, this is a setup to add the policies to secure it. So now let's go to API Manager, and we're going to add policies. Okay, so we're going to add policies to this API. And we're going to do the, let's go ahead and look at the policies for right now. And these are the out-of-the-box policies. For exam relevance, yes, you need to know them. Not only do you need to know them, I don't mean like know ins and outs and how to configure the details and all of that. Know what it's going to do and when you will apply it. Okay, what it will result in. So you will see that type of scenario-based question on that. So we're going to actually use the client ID. Where are you? Rate limiting SLA based. That's the one we're going to do. So before we do that, let's create we're only going to do one in our case. We're not going to create multiple. We're going to create a service. We're going to create a tier. So to come up here, we'll go back to where we were in API Manager, come down to SLA tiers. SLA tiers. And we're going to add an SLA tier here. And this one is going to be, we can make this be our prime tier. Okay. And there is a difference between a manual and an automatic approval on these. And you're probably familiar with those. I probably should do two of them. We'll do one prime and one free. We'll go back and do a free one just so you can see the difference in the automatic and manual. So we have our prime tier. We're going to let this one be a manual approval. And that means the human needs to be in the loop to approve that. Okay. It won't just automatically give them client ID and client secret. That being said, we want this one to be number of requests. We will do, oh goodness, 100 requests in a single time period of milliseconds. We should not exceed that. That's going to be a pretty good amount there. So this is where you would set the prime tier. Under the description, we will say this is the prime access to this API, something like that. Okay. But it is manual and it's got to be approved. So you can add other limits. If you have additional limits that seemingly conflict, I think the one that it hits first, like if you had a number of requests in a day or hour, or week, or whatever the case may be, whichever one is hit first is the one that is going to apply. Okay, we're just going to go with a single one, but you can add multiple ones. Okay, and we'll click on add. Okay, so that's the first tier. Let's add another one real quick. Add SLA tier. This one's free tier. And so this one is going to be free access, less requests per second. Per minute. We'll do minute. Okay, let's request per minute. So on this one, we'll have this one be automatic. We'll just give them a client ID and client secret right away because they're not going to be really being able to have a lot of access here. So we're going to say 3 requests in a single time period of 1 minute. Okay, so that's going to be a bad experience. We're really limiting them. Hey, it's free. So let's go ahead and click on add. So now we have 2 SLA tiers established here. And we can go back now and add our policies. Okay, so let's click on add our policies. And we'll go ahead and add the policy. Again, remember, this is on our API in a particular environment. So you can have different policy criterias added per environments. Obviously, production is going to have better, different policies, perhaps. And you'll see this automated policy area also here. There is back in the API administration area where we can preset policies to be added to every API in that particular environment or by group. So there's different things you can do on the automation. And then this will apply, show that policy's been automatically applied. And if you add, let's say we have one that's added to all of them, and then you want to add it again here to make it be either more restrictive or more flexible, you can add the policy here as well and choose to let it override the automated. You'll get a message and it'll say, this is already automated. You want to override it, and you can say yes or no. So we'll add a policy. And all these things I'm saying you can do, come back in and do them. Try them out, you know. Time doesn't permit really for me to go into all those different scenarios, but add a policy, add a spike, you know, a spike policy or something. And, you know, when you add those, it gives you a chance to really see that behavior and, you know, hold it closer to your memory, I guess. All right, so we're going to come down here to rate limiting SLA and go ahead and select that one. Now, there is the rate limiting, and there is also SLA by itself. Rate limiting, and then client ID and client secret, client enforcement, and rate limiting. So this one is a combination of them both. Okay. Now, you may, for whatever reason, might want to have that differently, but this is going to combine them both. So now we're ready to go to next. And it's defaulting in the client ID expression and the client secret expression. So that's fine. We'll leave those. We do want to expose the headers. Okay. And we also want to notice under the advanced options that you have the ability to apply this policy to the entire API, all of our endpoints, the get, the delete, the post, all of that. Okay. Or you can be specific and say which one you want it to apply to. So you might want to have a different policy criteria based on the method resource that you have there. Okay. We're going to leave it for all, but do know you can set it specifically as well. And again, that's another thing to come back and do. All right, so we're going to click on apply. And as soon as we do this, that policy is dropping into this policy folder. Okay, so if we look at the logs in Runtime Manager on the proxy, I want you to go to the logs on that proxy. And we're going to notice that the proxy is going to have in its logs the policy that was just added. Okay. So applied policy, rate limiting. Now, when we go back and send in this request by way of the proxy, we're going to get invalid client ID or client secret. So now it's secure. Okay. We now need client ID and client secret. If we go to Exchange and we go to Dev, and there is our endpoint right there. See it? And we send in the request. Nope. No longer. No longer. We need client ID and client secret. So how do we get the client ID or client secret?
How to what?
How do we get the
Request.
client ID or client secret?
Request access to it
Okay.
from within Exchange.
All right. So we'll come up here and we're going to request access, right? Okay. Now, when this comes up to request access, we're going to choose which instance we want. There's really only one. But if we had this, if this API had been promoted to production, it would show all of them. And now we're going to select an application. And this is not a Mule application. This is a contract application, an agreement between us and this API for this client. So click on create a new application. Okay.
Oh, Diane, you just
Yes.
want to just point out, especially to remember that this is an Exchange, not API Manager, where you do this.
Yes, correct. Exchange right here, request access. Yep. Yeah, and that's helpful to know too. Exam relevant, you want to know what you do where. Where you would do some, you know, where you would request client ID and client secret. Where you would go in and approve someone's access to client ID and client secret. Okay, so we're going to look at those. So let's choose the ID, or I'm sorry, the API instance. And then we're going to do two different applications. We're going to create one application. And this one is going to be the free tier app. Okay. And you could do a description if you would like. You can do some details here on the app URL, that type of thing if need be. And we'll click on create. And our next thing to choose is what service level agreement do you want? So of course, we're going to choose the free to show that will be, you know, what this application in particular will do, and the associated client ID and client secret. And we can see it's 3 requests per minute. So we'll go ahead and click on request access. And remember, this one was an automatic approval. So we're going to get our client ID and client secret right away. So let's copy those into our notepad. Okay. And like I said, these are not going to be the best experience, but we're going to see a couple things occur when we test these out. And then we can close this. Okay. And now, as the user or the person that is representing the client, if we lost that client ID and client secret, where would we find that? Who can tell me where I can find my client ID and client secret?
In API manager.
Okay, so I'm going to API manager. Where do I go?
Under API administration, go
Okay.
back. There's a client applications.
Okay,
And then when you access that, you could.
see client ID and client secret here. Yes. Now, there are times that just someone who is requesting access, who is a lower level permission user, will not see this. This is kind of a high level, high permission access to all client ID and client secrets. So if I was not able to see this, and a lot of people aren't able to see this in their accounts, how else as the user would I be able to find this?
You need to do it from Exchange.
Okay, go into Exchange.
Let's see if I remember this correct. This should be in your assets,
Uh-huh.
and you should see your applications right there in
Okay.
the left. My applications.
Excellent. Yes. So as a user or someone who's representing, you know, that this particular client app, yes, this is where you would go. So remember, based on the user access is going to find that in Exchange. If you are higher level on the platform account, you will see all of the client apps listed here. And yes, you would see them. You can even give someone, like one of the things we had to clean up on one of the platforms or on one of the contracts I was on with managing the platform was also, there were people that owned this, like users that own the API that were no longer with the company. And so we created a service account that would exist beyond different people coming and going. So at any rate, you want to be sure that, you know, you understand what is at this level. Being that you're the organization administrator of your trial account, you're going to see this, but you may not see this client apps in other places. So then also, let's go back in. Well, let's go look at another view here real quick. In API Manager, let's go into our APIs. So go back to API Administration and go specifically into the American Flights API. And on the left-hand side, we're going to see contracts here. So now you're pretending to be the owner of this API. So you're really having different roles here. You're the owner of this API. And when you're looking at the contracts here, we can say, oh, I can see that there's someone that's using this API on the free tier, and here's their client ID. Now we don't see the secret, but we can see the client ID and at least know, that this one was automatic and approved automatically, but you could revoke it here. So you could manage access to this API from here. Okay, let's go back to Exchange. And let's request access again. This time we're going to do the paid or the prime. There we go. And request access. Same API instance, but instead of the free, now it's going to be the prime tier access. Oh, I need to create a new app. Sorry, hang on a minute. Whoop, I'm doing that wrong. So create a new app, name it, and you could write a description if you wanted to, just so it has more meaning. Click on create. And we're going to choose the prime tier. And request access. Now this time, you're going to get a notification like this. It says your request has been received, it's pending. And as the owner of the API, you're going to get an email saying, hey, someone's requesting access, you need to approve it. Okay, so that's going to be out there also. Not only this, but if we come out of here, go ahead and close this. And now you want to be that API owner, right? The API manager, and refresh this screen that we're on under the contracts. And we can now see that someone has requested access and the status is pending, waiting for you to approve it. Okay. So once you approve it, then that person that was waiting will get a notification that it's been approved, and they can come back to Exchange, go to their applications, and there is their prime tier access, client ID and client secret. Okay. And these are the ones that we want to use going forward. So realistically, save the prime values instead of the free values, because we're going to be using, let me label mine. There you go. We're going to be using these in the connector as well. All right, so now let's go test them out. Okay, so if we go back to our assets, and we'll go, wrong one, go into our American flights. And now if we test it out, we want to put in the client ID and client secret we got. And if anybody, well, mine's not public. Yeah, I was going to say, I could, if you're just watching, I could send it to where you can access it. I've not made it public yet, though. But now we need to add the client ID and client secret here. To do that, we're going to click on add and type in client underscore ID and get the ID value. Paste it in under the header value. And add another one, client underscore secret. And likewise, do the same thing for the secret. Paste it in. And now we're going to send it. Okay, and you have access. And it is slightly a pain to fill this out for the headers here. Okay, kind of a pain to do. But more importantly, if we use this as a connector, because remember, it's a connector. And it's going to be a connector we use in our process API. Okay, we're going to use this connector and the patient connector. And to authenticate, we're going to need to configure that connector with a client ID and client secret. Now, if I left it just as it is right now, I'm not going to have a place in Exchange to test this out, nor when I bring that connector into Studio to use for my process API, I'm not going to have a nice, neat place to put my headers. Okay, so importantly, we want to add those headers to our specifications. Who wants to tell me, first of all, where I can find the code to include in the specification? Where will I see the headers defined and details in the code? Some of the policies come with a code snippet. Where will I find that code snippet?
Taking, I guess, exchange assets policies.
No, no, good question, or good guess though. Good guess. Where
Isn't
do we
it
just
an
have the
API manager where you add the where you can add the policies?
correct API manager? Yes. So in API manager, we're going to go back to the policies now. Go back to the policies. And in the rate limiting SLA based, if you mouse over the 3 dots that are on the right, you're going to click on that and there is an API specification snippet. Let's go ahead and click on that. Okay, we've got different versions, different languages. We can use RAML 1.0, 0.8, OAS 2, 3. Okay, so depending on what version that our specification is using in Design Center, we'll copy the code block that's here. So let's go to RAML 1.0. And you'll see here that there is a trait. Okay, we're creating a trait in RAML. In OAS, it's going to be a parameter. Okay, we'll do that with our other one. Which one did we use? Goodness, it's terrible. I don't remember. Let's go to Design Center on another tab. And we'll go to American Flights. And this one is in RAML. Should be in RAML if memory serves me. Yeah. So in our RAML code, we're going to be including a trait here right under the title. Okay. So make a little room. And let's go back to our RAML 1.0 because that's what the version we're using. And we're going to add this trait. Now, under the traits, the client ID required is the name of the trait. We could call it Fred. We could call it whatever we want. We want it to be meaningful, but I want you to know that that's not a reserved word. That's what we're calling this trait. Okay. Now, headers, that's a reserved word. Client ID is the name of the header. We're defining that it's a string. Again, client secret is the other name of the header, and it's defined as a string. And then we're defining responses that we might have. So let's copy this code block here. Okay, copy that trait, and let's go to Design Center and drop it in our code block. Okay. And now you have the traits defined, client ID required. Again, that's the name of this trait. And then you've got the headers defined here. So our next step is to go back. And now we also need to use it in your code block. Okay, you want to use it in your code block. And you can see there is a resource, there is a method, and then there is this code that is called, it is using the is reserved word to define what you want to use. And we are saying we want to use the client ID and client secret trait under this block of code. So we're going to copy that. Just the is line. That's all we need to copy, really. Okay. The other part is really just an example. Make sure you are under RAML 1.0, and let's go back to designer. And we want to place that. Now, you can put it in different locations. We're going to go ahead and put it right under the resource. In other words, the endpoint, and paste that in. Make sure it's aligned with the get for the first one. So it's above the get in this case. And then we're going to come down to the ID also and paste that in here as well. And now we're telling the code. In our code, we're saying, I want you to use client ID and client secret under each of these endpoints and use it for the methods. So now it's auto-saved. Let's come over here to the get
Diane.
flight. Yes.
While you're here, can you just pause for a second to show the reason that you're using traits or parameters is that if you didn't do that, you'd have to copy that block of client, those headers twice in this case.
We're using code. Yes. Great point. So if we look at the RAML library, the raml.org.
How twice? Sorry.
I'm sorry.
When Ethan was interjecting and saying that.
You're using those security parameters, the client ID and client secret, have to be used in both of the methods. In the outer get request, and then when you're getting a particular ID, both times you need to authenticate with the client ID and client secret.
Okay, thank you.
And in a RAML specification, it's not true that you have to use it for every RAML method, for every REST method. That's up to how you design the API.
Okay, got it.
Like you might not require security to get something, you might only require it to post or put something, to change something.
So you could put it underneath the method, and it would, if we had placed it under the method, it would apply to that method, right?
Right, and there's to the resource.
Mm-hmm.
Understood. Sorry, I had to leave, but thank you, Ethan. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, I see your message. Yeah, he's got to drop. Okay. Yes. So, yeah, it's reusing. I was trying to find the details on the traits. It should be listed in here. I think it's types and traits at the top. There's types. Are you seeing traits? Type expressions. But I'm not seeing traits. Come on.
This is 1.0.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah, it is.
Why was traits considered to be a different version too, or? Array scalar.
Something, now I gotta remember. Something changed with those.
Here it is. Resource types and traits. Okay. So a trait allows you, like Ethan was saying, allows us to reuse code. When we define a trait, and these are not really answering what I wanted it to see. But in our case, it's a great example to show the trait that's actually being utilized. So when you just, and there are other kinds of traits as well, secured, query parameters. So it really helps us to not have to write the code numerous times.
Right. You notice here they're including it as a reusable RAML file. So if you wanted to update it, you would update the secured.raml file, and it would update all the related RAML files for all the different APIs that are using it.
So essentially, the way we're using this here, we would have to manage any changes in line, in the code in line. But we could do the include, and then it would be, well, in this case, it's just showing it as a fragment, but it's within, it's not an exchange, but it's within the file structure of the specification. But yeah, you'd have one location to manage. Well, not that one, but down here. But we could import them too, right?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So to understand, you know, the traits and then the code block that's here for managing it, having it defined as a trait is one thing. You've got to also define where you're applying it, where it's using that. And that's what we're doing. That's what we did here. This is statement or is whatever. I always want to call them a function. It's not a function, but the is, what the is does is it refers to whatever is being called or whatever is being used. Yep. All right, so we now have this here. Now, when we go to click on get flights, let's take a look at how that has modified this here already and click on try it. And notice now there's a nice place to put client ID and client secret. Now, it's really not authenticating it against the policy here when we send this in. We can send in bogus information because this is just in the design center. Okay. So that's not going to have a bearing here, but let's go ahead and publish this to Exchange. And in this case, we have updated really it's more of updating the documentation for the scaffolding of the client ID and client secret. So we'll let it go through as a patch on that. Did I use the right terminology on that? Yeah. All right, sure. I'm calling it what it's supposed to be. And we'll go ahead and publish to Exchange. So now our managed API is that version, as that one version away from what we just added. So what we need to do now is we need to update the managed API and API manager. So let's go back to API manager here and look at our summary, our API summary, and notice that the asset version here is 1.0.1, the previous version. Yours might be 1.0.0, whatever the case is on whatever your version is. You just added a new version that has scaffolding for the client ID and client secret, or the trait for it, for those headers to be defined. And yes, we could add them in Exchange manually, but where it really matters is using this as a connector so that you have an easy location to configure your client ID and client secret in that connector that we'll see in our process API. So let's go ahead and click on edit. And we want to go to actions. Actually, I did that wrong. You don't need to go to, let me go back to the managed API here. You don't have to do the edit icon. We're going to actually click on the actions at the top up here. And we can see change API specification. Okay, and this is where we're going to go ahead and upgrade it to the newest version, the latest version. Change of this requires a redeployment. Go ahead and click on change. Okay, it's redeploying. I think if you go to Exchange, it's already going to have it there. Let's go to Exchange. Refresh this page. And now change from the mocking service to our dev environment. And let's go ahead and come on. Yeah, if you scroll down, now we have a place to put client ID and client secret. Let's add our credentials. There we go. And now we should be able to have access to this.
And the important thing here is we didn't have to recode the application.
Yes, true. We didn't have to go back to Studio to re-update it there.
The enforcement's being done by the policies, which are injected back into the application, actually. They're actually executing in the application through auto discovery.
Well, we're using proxy.
Oh,
on
in the
this.
proxy app, but still the
Yeah.
proxy app is still a Mule app.
It's
but
still, yeah.
there's still an implementation that's being updated.
This is updated. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. This part's being up now when it's embedded. Yeah. Auto discovery. And I think what we'll do is we'll add that one. This is a nice place to wrap this up because I want to show you a couple other things too. But this is, we'll do this one Tuesday. But coming back to what we're talking about here, just like what Ethan was saying, is that this gets updated. It updated, you know, when we added that policy, it went in the policies folder. Now, as we come into using this endpoint, we're coming in and have to have the proper credentials to hit our our application, whether it's a Mule or a non-Mule app. And so
Yeah. Diane, with the proxy app is still using API kit, right? So it,
well,
it
the
has a
API
different,
kit lives
has-
here.
the implementation of the proxy app is a Mule app. And I think if you actually look at it, the proxy app, it also has, you know, an HTTP listener, and it's using API kit to implement the proxy API.
How would we see that? By downloading it?
I think so it's when it's deployed, yeah, you can download the jar file and then you can open it in Studio.
Let's do it. View code.
Yeah, they always confuse this topic when people talk about it.
Uh-huh.
So
I'm going to get this code though. I'm trying to figure how, I wonder if it's in.
well, it's deployed to Runtime Manager, right?
Yeah. That's where I was thinking is actually Runtime Manager.
So the proxy, you think of the proxy API as a layer, and then the implementation is another layer of Mule flows and code.
Uh-huh.
In the proxy, when you have a proxy, you split those up across the internet.
There it is. Look at it. Right? That's our application jar file for the proxy. How
And
can
you
I download that?
may be able to, yeah, let's see.
All right, we're digging, folks. This is good stuff. This is off the path.
You could just click on it and it would download, but
I know. Like on a regular application, I think that works. Look, no, it's not working on this one.
okay. Because now they're all in Exchange or something. You might not be able to do it anymore.
Yeah, I wonder.
Anyways, in a way, it doesn't matter because MuleSoft manages the proxy API, but in fact, they're using the same technology. There's still API kit with an ID and everything.
Yeah.
It's just doing the work for you. That's the nice thing
Yeah.
about the proxy apps is that it takes some of the work away from you.
Well, because in our application, we also have the API kit router in our American Flights jar file. That would have, it should have the interface there as well as using this. But I see what you're saying. There is a jar file auto-populated here. I wonder if, okay, let me go to Exchange. I wonder if I can get it from here. Hang on. Come on. But I want to go to legacy. I hope they never take the legacy search out. Otherwise, I'll have to think about what this URL is supposed to be. Because I end up hacking this all the time. Type connector, type app. Okay, so here's our proxy app here. And I wonder if I can't download it. I was wondering if I could download it. Can't.
It seems to be an API manager.
Yeah, it's more likely it would be an
I sent a link. It gives the steps.
Ah. Okay.
Yeah, because you don't want the public to be able to download the app. But as an API manager
True,
person,
true. That could be dangerous. Okay, API manager. Probably have it open in one of these. And then administration. And click the API you want to download. And it's under actions.
Yeah.
Oh,
Done.
download
Yeah.
proxy. Very cool. See? Teamwork.
yeah,
Okay, now I want to bring it
in the studio.
into studio. Yeah. This is so cool. Hey, that's
I
a
earned
neat
my lunch
little
again,
one.
Diane.
I'm sorry?
I earned my lunch again.
Oh, really? Yeah. This is anytime. Love it. Love it, love it. Hey, I was going to ask you if you want to conduct the exam prep tomorrow. Or
What do we-
with me. I mean,
Yeah.
it's you and I. I think
That'd be
Ryan's
great.
teaching. So,
Oh, the exam prep as opposed to the office hours. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Because if anybody's ready to go ahead and sit for the exam, they can. And if anything, it's also good to see where you're at, you know? So, yeah, if you want, we'll talk after this
Okay.
and hit some highlights. Come on. That's a cool walkway. Look at that. I wonder where that's at. Learn about this picture. It's in London. Alrighty. That's cool. All right, come on, studio. There we go. All right, so let's import that. Very cool. Jar file. Downloads. That is not where I wanted to be. There we go. That's it, right?
Oh, does it say proxy? Let's say proxy on it.
No. Let me make sure. Is that what just downloaded?
Is that the right timestamp? Yeah, 8:50. Okay, so
Yeah.
wait.
Let me look and see where that went. As you know, it might have gone into the browser. Where did that go? Yeah, that's it.
That's okay.
Yeah, interesting. So it's pulling it from the API. You know it?
Hmm.
That's my API name right there. That's the name of my API. Where was I going? Studio.
You want to open that up and see what it.
Yeah.
It should be
Yes. So sure. Go right ahead. There's different Java versions, I think, too. Let me close these down. Sure. Oh, wow. Look at this. Unknown, unknown. This is so cool. All right. So there's the API, but look, it's a request, which makes sense, right?
Oh, that's the implementation to the back end. It's not showing the front
There's
Yeah.
inbound config. Okay, so there's an inbound config. Oh, there's nothing. It's just a listener.
In the outbound, what's the outbound config? They switch what they call inbound and outbound.
The requests. Huh. All right, so this is the main thing right here. Let me go full screen.
No, what's what's the inbound look like?
There's nothing in the flow, message flow.
Oh, it's just a listener.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Okay, well, I guess those custom. Where's it listening for?
Probably on this proxy. But what is this unknown?
You got to look at the XML code to see what those are.
The rest validator.
The configuration XML. Oh, I see, right. Okay, they're using a REST validator to do it rather than a.
Implementation API spec. Okay, so
But
where's
they
it?
must,
Yeah.
but they're enforcing policies.
Sorry, I jumped. Let me go back to that for you.
Where's the policy enforcement happening?
Proxy. What's up here?
Endpoint.
Let me
Proxy.
go full screen. Hold on. Attributes, method, requests.
Headers.
I don't see the policy, do you?
No, but they're obviously.
Maybe it wouldn't be here. Maybe it would be just the. But it's pulling also. I want to see where it's getting the specification. Here's the implementation API spec.
Oh, they're using, so it says API Gateway Auto Discovery. That's the element with the app ID on line 20.
Wow. Okay, so it's actually using the auto discovery behind the scenes, even on a proxy.
Yeah, and if you look at the broken up, if you look at the basic configuration, the API Gateway Auto Discovery is within your application. That's the point. That line right there, 22, is whether you're responsible for that line or MuleSoft is going to manage that.
Automatically figure it in there. And
Where the policies are enforced.
yeah.
It's
That
called a
makes sense.
sidecar. It runs parallel to the actual Mule application in the VM.
Yeah, this is what it uses to associate it with, like when we looked at the logs.
Right. If you look at that app ID, the app ID is the ID of the proxy, not of the instance.
App ID of the proxy. Yeah, that makes sense.
Look
That
at the
makes sense.
configuration file, and I think those numbers will be
Let me go
different.
back in there. Config file. API ID. Okay.
201.603.
There's the RAML too. There's the spec. That's where it's getting my RAML from also. From the implementation API spec. Okay, I'm sorry. Where do you want me to?
Oh, let's look at that app ID and compare it to what's in API Manager.
Okay,
I think
there it is.
201. Oh, it's the same instance ID.